Good evening and welcome to another lesson. Again, this video will only take 15 minutes. I'll even try to get it less than that. Today our focus is going to be on adding integers, and we're going to start with really simple problems just so that we get the idea behind it. And our goal is to figure out patterns and rules so that when we get to a more challenging problem, we can apply those rules. So I know it's going to start out and you're going to think, gosh, this is simple. We learned this years ago, and that's true, but we're going to build on that, make it a little more challenging so that when we get to hard problems, you can look back at these simple ones and figure out the rules or the patterns that we found. All right, so the first thing I need you to do is open up your notebook, and you're going to title this page Adding Integers and put today's date, which is 10/26/2016. The next thing I would like you to do is create this number line. Notice I have 0 in the center, and I'm counting up from 1 to 8 on the right hand side, and then from -1 to -8 on the left hand side. We just started talking a little bit about negative numbers, and that's really our focus for this week, is to figure out rules that we have when we're adding positive and negative integers. So we're going to mix it up a little bit and give you, I think it's 6 different scenarios, and from that we want you to be able to come up with some rules. But before we get to that, I want to give you an extra credit challenge. We're talking about negative integers, and I always like to think about when we're going to use this in real life, or when we see these concepts in real life. So if you can figure out or give us an example of when we see negative numbers in real life, I want you to send those to me. It could be a picture, it could be a situation, it could be a picture that you take or you get off the internet and you can put it in a Google Doc and send it to me. So again, your challenge is to think about when we use negative numbers in life. Okay? A little extra credit for you. All right, so you've copied down the adding integers, the date, and created the number line. We're going to start out with something super simple. I know you learned this probably 2nd or 3rd grade, but it's going to give us, again, a little piece to the puzzle. We're going to start out with something such as 3 plus 3. So I want you to write that down. We're just going to really quickly show on the number line. I'm going to start with the first integer, which is 3. I'm going to put in a little X there. And what it tells me to do is I need to move 3 spaces ahead. I'm going to move forward 3 spaces. I know it's forward because it's a positive number. And when we're talking about positive numbers, we always are moving to the right on a number line. If it's a negative number, we would move to the left. So all I'm going to do is jump 1, 2, 3. Oops, that's kind of an ugly jump, but you get the idea. And we end up at 6. So again, we start at 3, we ended at 6. And we show that 3 plus 3 equals 6. Very simple, right? Now we're going to throw in a negative integer. So we're going to start out with taking 6, so right where we ended, and I'm going to add to that a -2. Notice when I write this, I'm putting the -2 in parentheses. And that's very important because this is one of the rules of math when you have a sign, such as an addition sign, and then you have a negative number right after it. Notice there are 2 symbols that would be right next to each other. In order to distinguish them or to help us out a little bit, we need to put parentheses around the second one to separate the 2 symbols. So now I read it 6 plus a -2. So I'm going to start at the 6. I'm going to work under the number line this time. And again, you're copying down the problem as well as the work that I'm showing. And since it's a -2, it means I need to back up 2, or I need to go to the left 2 spots. So I'm going to go 1, 2, and that gets me to a +4. Okay, not too bad, right? I'm going to throw another one at you. We're going to start at a -5 now. So notice on the first 2, I started with a positive number. Now I'm going to start with a negative number, and I'm going to add to it a +3. Notice I don't need to put this in parentheses because there's not a sign before it. If there's not a symbol before the number, I'm going to make the assumption it's a positive number. So I'm going to start at a -5, and I'm going to add to that a +3. That means I need to move forward 3 spots, or I need to move to the right 3 spots. So I move 1, 2, 3. And where that gets me to is -2. Okay, and the next one that we're going to show is I started with a positive, then a negative. I'm going to start with another negative, and I'm going to add to that this time a -3. And you're going to notice that I ran out of a little room on the number line. So I'm going to start at the -6, and I'm going to add to that a -3. Notice I made a mistake there. I need to put my parentheses around that. So again, it's -6 plus a -3. So I'm starting at the -6, and I'm going to move backwards 3 spots. 1, 2, 3. So I'm in a -9. So I gave 4 scenarios here. And what we need to do next is we need to come up with a rule. We're going to come up with a rule for actually 3 different situations. I'm going to attempt to type this in, and you need to copy this down, and you're going to add the ending to it. And there it is. I'm going to add in text, and I think 18 will be enough. All right, so I'm going to start out with when adding 2 positive integers, the answer will be, and I want you to fill in the blank. You have an option of positive or negative. So again, we're looking at this example right here where we have a 3 plus a 3, and what do we get for an answer? You should recognize that we get a positive answer. So again, I'm going to put in positive. So when adding 2 positive integers, the answer will be positive. Okay, scenario number 2, which we started with a positive number and a negative number. Scenario 3 is adding a negative and a positive. So these 2 scenarios are similar in the fact that we're adding a positive and a negative integer. However, you should notice something about the symbol or the sign of the answer. There are 2 different signs. This one's negative and this one's positive. So when adding when adding a positive and negative integer, the answer will, dun, dun, dun. It's a little more challenging. How do we know what the answer is? In this case, it's a positive number. In this case, it was negative. What's the difference between the 2? Is that if I look at which one of these numbers is further away from 0. So we have a 6 and a -2. Notice a -2 is only 2 spots away from 0, while the 6 is 6 spots away. So when I'm adding a positive and a negative integer, the answer will always be the sign of the number that is further away from 0. Okay, let's test that out with the next one, where we had a -5 plus a +3. If I look on my number line, -5 is further away from 0 than 3 is from 0. Okay, so when we're looking at the sign, I know that my answer is going to be negative because -5 is further away from 0 than 3 is. So when adding a positive and a negative integer, the answer will take on the sign of the number that is further away from 0. Now some of you might have been tempted to say, take on the sign of the larger number. However, and we have not talked about this, but it's something that we will talk about soon, -5 actually is has less value than a +3. So we would not say that -5 is larger than 3. It's actually smaller in value. So we don't want to say that it takes on the sign of the larger number, because -5 is not larger than 3. We'll talk about that a little bit later to why that is, but I want you to recognize that we're talking about the numbers that are further away from 0. So again, we have a number of situations here. We have one more that we need to look at. So we talked about when we're adding two positive integers. That one's pretty simple. We learned that a while ago. Then we talked about when adding a positive and a negative. How about when we're adding two negatives? So when adding two negative integers, the answer will be, dun, 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 it's going to be negative. And we see that with -6, and then we moved -3. We moved further away from 0. We're adding two negative numbers. We're going to have a number that is negative, and it's further away from 0 than these two numbers individually. So there you have it. We have four situations that give us 3 different rules to adding integers. Now I'm going to give you a problem that extends this a little bit further. Need to erase some stuff here. I originally was going to handwrite that in, but I realized that it took forever. So I'm going to give you a couple problems that I want you to think about, just to extend your thinking about this. I want you to think about if we're talking about 3 integers now. I'm going to add a -3 plus an 8 plus a -10. And I want you to see if you can come up with the answer. And the other one that I want you to think about, now we're applying it to something a little bit larger. So we have 767 plus a -47. All right, so when we're looking at these 3 numbers, I notice I have 2 negative numbers. And when we're adding, my parentheses, when we're adding, we can add in any order. We'll recognize that I could add -3 plus 8 plus a -10, or I could switch around the order and still get the same answer. And that's because we're adding straight across, so we can add them in any order. So what I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to look at my 2 negative numbers and I'm going to add those together. And I know just from my rule up here, when we're adding 2 negative numbers, oh, here it is. When we're adding 2 negative numbers, my answer is going to be negative. So if I think about adding -3 and -10, I know I'm going to go further away from 0. I could start at -3 and move 10 back. That's going to get me to -13. And I'm going to add to that now a +8. And now I'm going to look at the rule. When I'm adding a positive and a negative number, the answer will take on the sign of the number further from 0. Well, 13 is further from 0. Excuse me, -13 is further from 0 than 8 is. So I know my answer is going to be negative. Now all I have to do, and we didn't talk about this up here, but hopefully you notice that once we've determined what the answer is, all I have to do is find the difference between these two. What's the difference between -13 and 8? Well, that's 5. And I could show it up on the number line if you're not sure if you believe me. But if I'm at -13, I can move back 8 spots, and I'm going to be at a -5. So I took a little more challenging problem, which had 3 integers in it, and I was able to apply the different rules that we had here. Last one. We're almost to the end here. We have a much larger number, and I know that this number, which is a positive number, is way further away from 0 than -47 is going to be. So now I know that my answer is going to be positive. I don't need to write a positive because, again, we talked about that. If I have a positive number, I know that it's positive if there's no sign in front of it. And now all I have to do is I have to find the difference between these two. So if I line it up, show my work, 2 and 7, I know that the difference is $720. So if I have a $767 bank account.